I'd been doing commercial diving for 15 years, but this job felt different from the moment I got the call. The company rep couldn't give me a straight answer about why the rig had been abandoned so suddenly back in the 80s. All he'd say was that operations stopped overnight and they needed a structural inspection before deciding whether to demolish it or sell it for scrap. Probably just environmental regulations, Jeff said as we loaded our gear onto the workboat that morning. You know how it was back then? Companies would just walk away rather than deal with cleanup costs. I wasn't so sure. In my experience, oil companies didn't abandon profitable rigs without a damn good reason. The whole thing smelled fishy, but the pay was good enough that I didn't push for more details. The rig sat about 12 miles off the coast, a rusted skeleton rising out of the gray water. As we approached, I could see why they wanted an inspection. The platform looked like it was barely holding together. Metal beams twisted at odd angles, railings missing entire sections, and what was left of the superstructure covered in decades of corrosion. Jesus, Jeff muttered, steering our boat around to the lee side. This thing's a death trap. That's why we're here, I said, checking my dive computer, to see if it's worth saving or if they should just blow it up. We tied off to one of the lower support beams and started unloading our equipment. The water around the rig was darker than I expected, not the clear blue you usually found this far offshore, but a murky green that made it impossible to see more than a few feet down. Jeff was already pulling on his wetsuit. Let's get this done quick. I've got a date tonight. Hold on, I said. We need to go over the checklist first. He rolled his eyes. Come on, Thomas. We've done this 100 times. Not on a rig this old. I grabbed my clipboard and started running through the safety protocols. Water temperature's 58 degrees, visibility looks like shit, and we don't know what kind of debris might be down there. We're doing this by the book. Jeff sighed but didn't argue. He knew I was right, even if he didn't like taking the time. That was the difference between us. He was all about efficiency, getting in and out as fast as possible. I preferred staying alive. I checked our air supplies twice, tested the communication system, and made sure both our dive computers were synced. The sonar device went into a waterproof case along with the underwater camera and measuring tools. Our job was to inspect the main support structures for corrosion, check the foundation integrity, and document any damage that might affect the rig's stability. Estimated dive time is 45 minutes, I said, strapping the sonar device to my belt. We'll start with the northeast support beam and work our way around clockwise. Got it. Jeff was already sitting on the edge of the boat with his fins on. Can we go now? Something about his eagerness bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was just the way he kept looking at the water, like he was anxious to get down there. Or maybe it was the job itself, the vague explanations, the abandoned rig, the murky water that seemed to swallow light. I pulled on my mask and did a final equipment check. Everything looked good, but the feeling in my gut kept getting stronger. In 15 years of diving, I'd learned to trust my instincts. They'd kept me alive when equipment failed, when weather turned bad, when other divers made stupid mistakes. You feel that? I asked Jeff. Feel what? I don't know. Something's off about this whole thing. Jeff laughed. You're getting paranoid in your old age. It's just another inspection job. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking it. But as I sat on the edge of the boat, looking down into that dark water, every instinct I had was telling me to pack up and leave. The rig loomed above us like a metal graveyard, creaking and groaning in the swells. Seabirds had built nests in the twisted wreckage, but even they seemed to avoid the lower levels near the water. Thomas, come on. Jeff said. "We're burning daylight." I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the feeling. We had a job to do, and the sooner we finished it, the sooner we could get away from this place. I adjusted my regulator, checked my air one more time, and prepared to enter the water. The dread in my stomach felt like a lead weight, but I couldn't explain it to Jeff without sounding like a superstitious old fool. So I kept my mouth shut and focused on the technical aspects of the dive: depth, time, safety stops, emergency procedures, all the things that had kept me alive this long. Jeff was already in the water, floating beside the boat and waiting for me to join him. The sonar device felt heavier than usual as I lowered myself into the murky water, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to discover something we weren't prepared for. I slipped into the water after Jeff, the cold hitting me even through my wetsuit. The sonar device felt heavier than usual as I adjusted the straps and checked the display one more time. Everything looked normal on the surface readings, but I knew that could change once we got deeper. Jeff was already a few feet ahead of me, his fins cutting through the murky green water with practiced efficiency. I could see his outline through the limited visibility, maybe 10 feet at most in these conditions. The water around the rig had that thick, soupy quality that made every movement feel sluggish. I followed him down toward the main support structure, keeping the sonar device positioned to get clean readings of the foundation. The first beam came into view through the murk, a massive steel column covered in decades of marine growth and corrosion. Barnacles and seaweed had claimed most of the surface, turning what used to be smooth metal into a rough, organic landscape. The depth gauge on my dive computer showed 20 feet as I approached the northeast support beam. I activated the sonar device and started my first scan, watching the display as it mapped the structure's dimensions. The readings looked normal at first. Solid steel, the expected thickness for a rig this size. Jeff swam past me toward the next beam, his movements confident and quick. He was already pulling out his underwater camera to document the corrosion patterns. I could see him gesturing at a section where the metal had worn thin, probably from years of saltwater exposure. I moved closer to the beam I was scanning, trying to get more detailed readings. The sonar device beeped softly in my ear as it processed the data, but something felt wrong. Not with the equipment, with everything else. A knot was forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with the dive itself. I'd been doing this work for 15 years. I knew what normal underwater anxiety felt like, and this wasn't it. This was something deeper, more primitive. Like my body was trying to tell me something my brain hadn't figured out yet. I forced myself to focus on the job. The sonar readings were what mattered right now, not some vague feeling of unease. I adjusted the device's settings and continued scanning the beam, documenting the measurements in my underwater notepad. The water got murkier as we went deeper. At 30 feet, I could barely make out Jeff's form as he worked his way around the structure. The rig's shadow blocked out most of the natural light from above, leaving us in a greenish twilight that made everything look alien and distorted. I swam to the next support beam, following our planned clockwise route around the foundation. The sonar device continued its steady beeping as it mapped each section. The readings showed the expected wear and corrosion, but nothing that would require immediate demolition. These old rigs were built to last. Jeff appeared beside me, tapping his dive computer and pointing upward. We'd been down for 15 minutes already. Time moved differently underwater, especially in conditions like these where visibility was so poor. I nodded and continued my scan of the current beam. That's when the sonar device started acting up. The display flickered, showing readings that didn't make sense. According to the device, there was something massive attached to the underside of the beam, something that definitely wasn't part of the original structure. I tapped the screen, thinking it might be a malfunction. The readings didn't change. If anything, they got more pronounced. The sonar was detecting something large and organic-looking, maybe 15 feet across, attached to the steel beam about 10 feet below our current position. I checked the device's calibration settings. Everything looked normal. I ran a quick diagnostic test and all systems showed green, but the readings kept showing this impossible object that shouldn't exist. Jeff swam over when he saw me fiddling with the equipment. I showed him the display pointing at the strange readings. Through his mask, I could see his eyebrows furrow in confusion. He gestured for me to try scanning a different area. I moved the sonar device to scan the adjacent beam. The readings went back to normal, just steel and marine growth. Exactly what we expected to find. But when I pointed it back toward the original location, the strange readings returned immediately. Jeff tapped my shoulder and pointed at his own equipment. He pulled out a backup sonar device from his gear bag and activated it. When he scanned the same area, his device showed the same impossible readings. Something was definitely down there. The uneasy feeling in my gut got stronger. In 15 years of commercial diving, I'd never seen sonar readings like these. Marine life didn't usually attach itself to rig structures in patterns this large and organized, and whatever was down there was interfering with our equipment in ways that didn't make sense. I looked at Jeff and pointed downward, toward the source of the interference. He nodded, but I could see hesitation in his body language. The same instinct that was making me nervous was probably affecting him too. We descended another 10 feet, following the sonar readings toward whatever was causing the interference. The water got even murkier at this depth, and the rig's shadow made it feel like we were swimming through liquid darkness. The sonar device's beeping got more erratic as we approached the source of the readings. The display showed we were getting close to something large, but I still couldn't see anything through the murky water. Visibility was down to maybe 5 feet now. Jeff was swimming slightly ahead of me, his fins barely visible in the gloom. I could hear his breathing through the water, steady but faster than normal. The sound of our regulators and the sonar devices beeping were the only noises in the underwater silence. I checked my air supply and dive computer. We still had plenty of time and air for the inspection, but something was telling me we should surface soon. Not the rational part of my brain that calculated dive times and safety margins, but something deeper and more urgent. The sonar readings were getting stronger. According to the device, we were almost on top of whatever was attached to the rig structure. But the water was so murky, I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. That's when I noticed the interference was affecting more than just our sonar devices. My dive computer was showing irregular readings too, and the compass was spinning slowly instead of holding steady. Something down here was messing with all our electronic equipment. I checked the sonar device calibration again, running through the diagnostic menu one more time. The screen showed all systems functioning normally, but the readings still didn't make any sense. Instead of the clean, geometric patterns I expected from steel beams and concrete foundations, the display kept showing organic-looking shapes that seemed to shift and move. I tapped the screen with my gloved finger, thinking maybe water had gotten into the housing somehow. The readings flickered for a second, then went back to the same impossible patterns. A massive blob-like shape appeared on the display, roughly 15 feet across, attached to what should have been solid rig structure. I turned toward Jeff and waved my hand to get his attention. He was about 10 feet away, photographing a section of corroded metal with his underwater camera. When he looked over, I pointed at the sonar device and shook my head, then gestured for him to come take a look. Jeff swam over with smooth, efficient strokes, his fins barely disturbing the murky water. I held the device so he could see the display clearly. His eyes widened behind his diving mask, and he looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen again. He pointed at the readings and made a questioning gesture with his hands. I shrugged and showed him the diagnostic screen, indicating that all the equipment was supposedly working fine. Jeff pulled out his backup sonar device and powered it on. The smaller unit took a few seconds to initialize, then started displaying the same impossible readings. Whatever was down here, both devices were picking it up. Jeff pointed toward the area where the interference seemed strongest, then looked at me with raised eyebrows. I nodded, understanding what he was suggesting. We needed to find out what was causing these readings. I checked my dive computer. We'd been down for 22 minutes and still had plenty of air. The water temperature was holding steady at 58 degrees. I started swimming around the main support beam, following the sonar readings as they grew stronger. The device beeped more frequently as I moved toward certain areas, like some kind of underwater metal detector. Jeff stayed close behind me, his camera ready to document whatever we found. The interference patterns became more intense as I approached the northeast corner of the rig structure. My compass started spinning again, and the dive computer flickered between normal readings and complete gibberish. I'd never seen equipment malfunction like this before, not in 15 years of commercial diving. I followed the strongest signals toward the underside of the rig, swimming beneath the massive support beams that disappeared up into the murky water above us. The visibility was getting worse down here, maybe only 3 or 4 feet now. I had to stay close to the structure to avoid losing my bearings completely. The sonar device was going crazy, beeping almost continuously. According to the readings, something huge was attached directly to the underside of the rig structure, something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. The shape on the display looked organic, with what appeared to be multiple appendages extending from a central mass. I swam closer to the beam, running my free hand along the corroded metal surface. The steel felt normal under my gloves, cold and rough with decades of marine growth. But the sonar kept insisting there was something else here, something large enough to interfere with our equipment from 20 feet away. Jeff tapped my shoulder and pointed upward, reminding me to watch our depth. We were now about 30 feet down from the surface, deeper than we'd planned to go during this initial survey. I checked my air supply. Still good, but we'd need to start thinking about heading up soon. I continued following the sonar readings, swimming along the underside of the rig structure. The beeping grew more erratic, almost frantic. Whatever was down here, we were getting close to it. The water seemed even murkier in this area, with an odd greenish tint that I hadn't noticed before. My dive computer flickered again, showing depth readings that jumped between 30 feet and 60 feet, then back to 30. The compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. I'd seen equipment failures before, but never anything this systematic. It was like something was actively interfering with our electronics. I moved around another support beam, following the strongest interference signals. The sonar device was beeping so rapidly now that it sounded almost like a continuous tone. According to the display, we were right on top of whatever was causing the problem. Through the murky water ahead, I could just make out a darker shape attached to the rig structure. It was massive, easily the size of a small car, and it definitely wasn't part of the original construction. The thing seemed to pulse slightly, though that might have been a trick of the limited visibility and shifting water. I stared at the massive shape through the murky water, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The sonar readings hadn't been wrong. There really was something huge attached to the underside of the rig structure. But this wasn't debris, or some piece of equipment that had broken off over the years. It was alive. The thing looked like a giant jellyfish, maybe 20 feet across, with a translucent dome-shaped body that pulsed with an eerie blue-green light. Multiple tendrils hung down from the central mass, some as thick as my arm, others thin as rope. They swayed gently in the current, reaching down into the darker water below. I'd been diving commercially for 15 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. Sure, I'd encountered plenty of marine life, sharks, rays, the occasional octopus, but nothing even close to this size, and definitely nothing that glowed like this thing did. The creature's light cut through the murky water around us, creating shifting patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. Each pulse sent waves of bioluminescence rippling across its translucent skin, like watching electricity flow through living tissue. I tapped my dive computer and checked my air supply. We'd been down for 28 minutes now, and I still had plenty of air left, but being this deep wasn't part of our original plan. I should signal Jeff and start documenting this discovery properly. I turned and waved to get Jeff's attention. He was about 15 feet away, still photographing the corroded support beams with his underwater camera. When he looked over, I pointed toward the creature and gestured for him to swim over. Jeff's eyes went wide behind his diving mask when he saw what I was pointing at. He immediately started swimming toward me, his fins cutting through the water with quick, efficient strokes. The camera hung from a strap around his wrist, forgotten for the moment. When he reached me, I pointed at the creature again, and then at my sonar device, showing him the readings. The display was going crazy now, with the interference stronger than ever. Jeff pulled out his backup sonar and powered it on. Within seconds, his device was showing the same chaotic readings mine had been displaying. We floated there for a moment, both of us staring at this thing that shouldn't exist. The creature seemed completely unaware of our presence, continuing its slow, rhythmic pulsing. The light patterns were almost hypnotic to watch, waves of blue and green flowing across its surface in complex sequences. I found myself studying those patterns more closely. There was something about the way the light moved that seemed deliberate, like it was trying to communicate something. The pulses weren't random. They followed a rhythm that felt almost musical, if that made any sense underwater. My training kicked in, reminding me to maintain a safe distance from unknown marine life. This was basic diving safety. You don't approach creatures you can't identify, especially ones this large. But as I watched the light patterns continue their hypnotic dance, I felt a strange pull to swim closer. The rational part of my mind knew I should stay back, document what we'd found, and surface to report this discovery to the proper authorities. Marine biologists would want to study this thing, whatever it was, but the longer I watched those pulsing lights, the more I felt drawn to move toward it. The patterns seemed to be speaking directly to my mind somehow, bypassing my conscious thoughts and appealing to something deeper. Each pulse sent a wave of, curiosity? Longing? I couldn't put a name to the feeling, but it was growing stronger. I started swimming toward the creature before I'd consciously decided to move. My fins pushed me through the water almost on their own, carrying me closer to those mesmerizing light patterns. The magnetic pull grew stronger with each stroke, like the thing was calling to me specifically. The creature's tendrils swayed gently in the current as I approached, some of them reaching up toward the rig structure above, others hanging down into the darkness below. Up close, I could see that its skin wasn't just translucent. It was almost glass-like, with the bioluminescent patterns flowing beneath the surface like living circuitry. 20 feet became 15, then 10. The pull was getting stronger, and I found it harder to think about anything except getting closer to those beautiful, hypnotic lights. I couldn't help myself. The creature's light was pulling me in like nothing I'd ever felt before. My fins kicked automatically, pushing me closer to that massive jellyfish thing, even though every part of my training screamed at me to keep my distance. The pulsing got stronger as I got closer. Blue and green waves of light rippled across its translucent body, and I couldn't look away. It was like watching the most beautiful thing in the world, and I had to get nearer to it. Had to touch it. That's when the visions started. 1 second I was staring at this creature attached to the rig, and the next second I was seeing something completely different. The water around me disappeared, and suddenly I was swimming through an endless blue void. No rig, no surface above me, just infinite ocean stretching in every direction. But I wasn't alone down there. Something massive was waiting for me in the depths below. Something so big I couldn't see the edges of it. Just a dark shape that went on forever, calling to me. And I wanted to go to it. Needed to go to it. The vision felt more real than the actual water around me. I could feel myself swimming deeper and deeper, following that pull toward whatever was waiting in the darkness. My lungs should have been screaming for air, but in the vision I didn't need to breathe. I just kept swimming down. Then another flash, and I saw myself abandoning everything, leaving the rig inspection, leaving Jeff, leaving the surface world entirely, just swimming away into the deep ocean to find that massive presence that was calling to me. It felt right. It felt like coming home. I kicked harder toward the creature, desperate to get close enough to touch those pulsing lights. The visions were showing me exactly where I needed to go, and I had to follow them. Nothing else mattered anymore. My dive computer was beeping, but I ignored it. Jeff was somewhere behind me, but I didn't care. All I cared about was getting to that beautiful, glowing thing and letting it show me more of what was waiting in the depths. I reached out toward one of its trailing tendrils, maybe 6 feet away now. The light was so bright it filled my entire field of vision. The visions were getting stronger, showing me swimming deeper and deeper until I found that enormous presence waiting for me in the darkness. That's when something grabbed my arm. I spun around and saw Jeff right next to me, his eyes wide behind his diving mask. He was pulling on my arm, trying to drag me away from the creature. I could see him gesturing frantically, pointing upward toward the surface. No way. I wasn't leaving. Not when I was this close. I yanked my arm out of his grip and turned back toward the creature. The visions were still there, still showing me that infinite blue void and the massive thing waiting in the depths. I had to follow them, had to find out what was calling to me. But Jeff grabbed me again, this time with both hands. He wrapped his arms around my chest from behind and started pulling me backward, away from those beautiful pulsing lights. I fought him, twisted in his grip, trying to break free so I could get back to the creature. The visions were fading the farther he dragged me, and I couldn't let that happen. I needed to see more, needed to understand what was waiting for me down there. Jeff was stronger than me, though. He kept pulling me backward even as I struggled against him, kicking and trying to swim back toward the creature. I could see its lights getting dimmer as we moved away, and the visions were starting to break apart. I grabbed onto one of the rig's support beams, trying to anchor myself so I could stay close to the creature. But Jeff pried my fingers loose and kept dragging me upward. The beautiful blue and green lights were getting smaller and smaller below us. The visions disappeared completely when we got about 30 feet away from the creature. Suddenly, I was just Thomas again, underwater with my diving partner, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. But I could still feel it, that pull toward the creature, toward whatever was waiting in the deep ocean. It was weaker now, but it was still there, tugging at something inside my chest. Part of me wanted to break free from Jeff and swim right back down to those pulsing lights. Jeff kept pulling me upward, toward the surface. I stopped fighting him, but I couldn't stop looking back down at the creature. It was still there, still glowing, still calling to me even from this distance. My dive computer showed we'd been down for 38 minutes. We needed to surface soon anyway, but I didn't want to leave. Every fiber in my body was telling me to go back down there and let the creature show me more of those visions. Jeff tapped his dive computer and pointed upward again. He was right. We were pushing our bottom time, and we needed to start our ascent. But as we swam toward the surface, I kept looking back at that beautiful, pulsing light getting smaller and smaller below us. The pull was still there, even as we got farther away. Weaker, but persistent. Like a song I couldn't get out of my head, except it was coming from somewhere deep in the ocean, calling me to come find it. I broke the surface, gasping, my regulator falling from my mouth as I grabbed for the boat's ladder. The cold air hit my face like a slap, and I could hear Jeff surfacing behind me, his breathing heavy and ragged. My hands shook as I pulled myself up the metal rungs, water streaming from my wetsuit. "Jesus Christ," Jeff said, hauling himself onto the deck beside me. He yanked off his mask and ran a hand through his wet hair. What the hell was that thing? I couldn't answer right away. My head felt like it was full of cotton, and every time I tried to think about what we'd just seen, the thoughts slipped away like water through my fingers. I sat down hard on the deck, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't know," I finally managed. "I've never seen anything like it." But that wasn't entirely true. Even as I said it, part of me wanted to go back down there. The feeling was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a constant pull toward the edge of the boat. I forced myself to look away from the water and focus on getting out of my gear. Jeff was already stripping off his wetsuit, moving with quick, efficient motions. "We need to call this in," he said. "Report it to the company. Let them send a team of marine biologists or whatever." I nodded, though the idea of other people going down there made my stomach twist. "Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're not equipped for this kind of discovery," Jeff continued, coiling his air hose. "This is way beyond a structural inspection. They'll want specialists." I started working on my own gear, but my hands kept fumbling with the buckles. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the water. Somewhere down there, that thing was still attached to the rig, pulsing with that blue-green light. The memory of it made my chest tight. "You okay?" Jeff asked, noticing my struggle with the wetsuit zipper. "Fine," I lied. "Just tired." He helped me get the suit off, and I was grateful for something else to focus on. But as soon as we finished with the gear, my mind wandered back to the creature. I could almost see those light patterns again, the way they'd moved across its translucent skin like living electricity. "We should get out of here," Jeff said, checking his watch. "Head back to shore and make the call." "Right." I stood up and walked over to the boat's controls, but my legs felt unsteady. The urge to look over the side was overwhelming. I gripped the wheel tighter and tried to concentrate on starting the engine. Jeff was organizing our equipment, stacking the tanks and checking the sonar devices. "Probably best if we don't mention how close you got to it," he said without looking up. "Company might not like hearing their divers were taking unnecessary risks." I thought about those moments when I'd been swimming toward the creature, completely unable to stop myself. The visions I'd seen, that endless blue void and the massive presence calling to me from the depths. My hands started shaking again. "Yeah," I said. "Good point." The engine turned over on the second try, and I felt a small relief as we started moving away from the rig. But even as the distance grew, I kept glancing back at the water. Part of me expected to see something following us, maybe one of those long tendrils breaking the surface. "Forget about it," Jeff said, settling into the passenger seat. "Whatever that thing is, it's not our problem anymore." I wanted to agree with him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't that simple. The creature had done something to me down there, shown me things that felt more real than the boat deck under my feet. Even now, with the rig shrinking behind us, I could feel it pulling at the edges of my thoughts. I tried to focus on practical things. We'd need to file a report, explain why we were abandoning the job. The company wouldn't be happy about losing the inspection fee, but they'd understand once we described what we'd found. At least, I hoped they would. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I realized we'd been underwater longer than I'd thought. My dive computer showed 38 minutes for the last dive, but it felt like we'd been down there for hours. Time had gotten strange near that creature, like the normal rules didn't apply. Jeff was quiet now, staring out at the water. I wondered if he was feeling the same pull I was, the same urge to turn the boat around and go back. But when I looked at him, he seemed more relaxed than I felt, like the whole experience was already fading for him. I envied that. Every time I tried to think about something else, my mind drifted back to those pulsing lights and the visions they'd triggered. The creature was still down there, waiting. The thought made my hands tighten on the wheel. "How long until we reach shore?" Jeff asked. I checked our position. "About 40 minutes. He nodded and leaned back in his seat. "Good. I could use a beer and a hot shower." I tried to imagine being back on land in a bar or restaurant, surrounded by normal people doing normal things, but the image felt distant and unreal. The only thing that felt real was the memory of that creature and the way it had called to me. The boat cut through the waves steadily, carrying us away from the rig, but with every mile we traveled, the pull grew stronger, like a rubber band stretching to its limit. I found myself slowing down without realizing it, my foot easing off the throttle. "Everything all right?" Jeff asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to speed up again. "Just being careful." But that wasn't true either. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back and finish what we'd started. The rational part of my brain knew that was crazy, but the rational part was getting quieter with each passing minute. I tried organizing our gear to distract myself, checking that everything was secure for the trip back. But my movements felt automatic, like I was going through the motions while my real attention was focused on the water behind us. The creature was back there, and somehow I knew it was aware of us leaving. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of orange and red. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful, but all I could think about was how the light would look filtering down through the water, illuminating that massive, translucent body and its hypnotic patterns. I watched Jeff coil the dive lines with mechanical precision, but something was off about the way he moved. His hands worked automatically, while his eyes kept drifting toward the water. We'd been back on the boat for maybe 20 minutes, and he hadn't said more than a few words since we'd surfaced. "You doing okay?" I asked, checking the air tanks one more time. He nodded without looking at me. "Fine, just thinking." But he wasn't just thinking. I could see it in the way he held his head, tilted slightly like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Every few seconds, his gaze would pull back to the dark water around the rig. I started the engine and pointed us toward shore, but even as we moved away from the structure, Jeff kept turning around to look back. His movements were subtle at first, just glances over his shoulder, but they became more frequent as we put distance between us and the rig. "Hell of a thing down there," I said, trying to get him talking. "Yeah." He was quiet for a long moment. "Hell of a thing." That was it. No discussion about what we'd seen. No speculation about what kind of creature could grow that large. Jeff, who normally couldn't shut up about anything unusual we encountered on a dive, just sat there staring at the water. The boat ride back took 43 minutes. During that time, Jeff spoke maybe 10 words total. He helped me tie off at the dock without being asked, but his movements were distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. We loaded our gear into my truck in silence. Normally, Jeff would be talking about getting a beer, maybe grabbing dinner somewhere. Instead, he just stood by the passenger door, looking back toward the harbor. "You sure you're all right?" I asked again. "I'm fine, Thomas. Just tired." But tired didn't explain the way he kept checking his phone or how he'd started walking toward the water's edge twice before catching himself and coming back to help with the equipment. I dropped him off at his apartment around 7 that evening. He got out of the truck, grabbed his gear bag, and headed for his front door. But halfway up the walkway, he stopped and turned around to look at me. "We should go back tomorrow," he said. "What?" "To finish the inspection. We didn't complete the job." I stared at him. "Jeff, we agreed to report what we found and let someone else handle it. But we're already familiar with the site. It would be more efficient if we finished what we started." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like it was the most logical thing in the world, made my stomach tighten. This wasn't Jeff talking. This was something else. "We're not going back," I said firmly. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, you're probably right." But even as he said it, I could see he didn't mean it. I went home and tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. Made myself dinner, watched some television, went to bed early. But I kept thinking about the way Jeff had looked at the water, that distant expression in his eyes. My phone rang at 11:30 that night. "Thomas?" Jeff's voice sounded strange, hollow. "I've been thinking about what we saw down there. Jeff, it's late. We can talk about this tomorrow." "No, listen. I think we made a mistake leaving. That thing, whatever it was trying to communicate with us." I sat up in bed. Communicate? The lights, the patterns. It wasn't random. There was intelligence behind it. "Jeff, you need to get some sleep. You're not thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly. For the first time in hours, I'm thinking clearly. We have to go back, Thomas. We have to finish what we started." The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end. "Jeff?" "I can still see it," he whispered. "Even with my eyes closed, I can see those lights." He hung up. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I considered driving over to his apartment, but what would I say? That I was worried about him because he wanted to go back and look at some kind of sea creature? It sounded crazy even to me. The next morning, I called him around 8. No answer. I tried again at 9, then 10. Finally, around 11, he picked up. "Hey, Thomas. You okay? You had me worried last night." "Last night?" He sounded confused. "What about last night?" "You called me. You were talking about going back to the rig." There was a pause. "I don't remember calling you." That made my blood run cold. "Jeff, you called me at 11:30. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. I went to bed around 10. I didn't call anyone." I didn't know what to say to that. Either he was lying or he genuinely didn't remember the conversation. Neither option made me feel better. "Look, why don't you come over? We can talk about what happened yesterday." "Actually, I was thinking we should head back out to the rig, finish the inspection." There it was again, that same flat, matter-of-fact tone. "We're not going back, Jeff. But we have a job to complete. The job is over. We found something that's beyond our scope and we're reporting it. End of story." He was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, you're right. I'll see you later." But I could hear it in his voice. He was just telling me what I wanted to hear. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on other things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Around 3 in the afternoon, I drove over to Jeff's apartment. His truck was in the parking lot, but when I knocked on his door, no one answered. I walked around to the back of the building. His apartment was on the ground floor, and I could see through the sliding glass door into his living room. Jeff was sitting on his couch, perfectly still, staring at something on his coffee table. I knocked on the glass. He didn't move. I knocked harder. Still nothing. Finally, I tried the door. It was unlocked. I slid it open and stepped inside. "Jeff?" He turned to look at me, but his eyes were unfocused, like he was looking through me instead of at me. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" "I came to check on you. You didn't answer your door." "I was just sitting here thinking." I looked at what he'd been staring at. It was a map of the local waters, with the location of the rig circled in red ink. "Jeff, what's this?" "I was planning our route for tomorrow. We should leave early, maybe 6 in the morning. That way we can get a full day's work done." "We're not going back." He looked at me like I'd said something incomprehensible. "Of course we're going back. We have work to finish." I sat down across from him. "Jeff, listen to me. Yesterday we encountered something dangerous. Something that affected both of us. You're not thinking clearly right now." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "No, you're not. You called me last night and don't remember it. You're sitting here planning a dive we already agreed not to make. This isn't you." He stared at me for a long moment, and for just a second, I thought I saw a flicker of the real Jeff in his eyes. But then it was gone. "I think you should leave," he said quietly. "Jeff, please, just go." I wanted to argue, wanted to shake him until he snapped out of whatever this was. But I could see it wouldn't do any good. Whatever was happening to him, it was the same thing that had happened to me down there. The same pull, the same compulsion. The only difference was that I'd been pulled away before it could take complete hold. I left his apartment and drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes. It was the same look I'd seen in my own reflection that morning after the dive. Distant, hungry, like part of me was still down there in the dark water. That evening, around 7, my phone rang again. "Thomas, I need you to come pick me up." "Where are you?" "At the harbor. I'm at the dock where we tied up yesterday." My heart started racing. "What are you doing there?" "I was going to take the boat out myself, but I can't get it started. I think there's something wrong with the engine." "Jeff, stay right there. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to get you." I drove to the harbor as fast as I could without getting pulled over. When I got there, I found Jeff standing at the end of the dock, staring out at the water. The boat was still tied up, but he'd already loaded diving gear into it. "Jeff, what the hell are you doing?" He turned to look at me, and I could see that whatever had been left of the real Jeff was almost gone now. His eyes had that same distant quality, but there was something else there too, a kind of desperate hunger. "I have to go back, Thomas. I can hear it calling." "You can hear what calling?" "The creature. It's been calling to me all day. I can't ignore it anymore." I stepped closer to him. "Jeff, that thing is dangerous. It's affecting your mind, making you think you need to go back. But you don't. You need to stay away from it. You don't understand. It needs me. It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "I don't know, but I have to find out." He turned and started walking toward the boat. I grabbed his arm. "You're not getting in that boat." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back at my face. For a moment, I thought he might listen to reason. Then he yanked his arm free and took another step toward the boat. "Don't try to stop me, Thomas. I'm not letting you kill yourself. I'm not going to die. I'm going to understand." He reached for the rope that secured the boat to the dock. I grabbed him again, this time with both hands, and tried to pull him away from the water. He fought against me, stronger than I expected, his movements sharp and desperate. "Let go of me." "Jeff, listen to yourself. This isn't you talking." But he wasn't listening. He broke free from my grip and stumbled toward the edge of the dock. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to jump in fully clothed, but instead he started climbing down into the boat. I followed him, grabbing the back of his shirt and trying to haul him back up onto the dock. He spun around and shoved me hard enough that I almost fell into the water myself. "Stay away from me, Thomas. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." The look in his eyes told me he meant it. This wasn't my diving partner anymore. This was someone, something else entirely. I grabbed Jeff's shoulders as he lunged toward the diving tanks. His muscles were tense under my grip, and he twisted against me like he was fighting for his life. "Jeff, stop," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're not thinking straight." He spun around to face me, and I barely recognized the look in his eyes. They were wide and unfocused, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "You don't understand," he said. "It's calling to me. I can hear it." "There's nothing calling you. That thing down there is dangerous." He shook his head violently. "No, you're wrong. It wants to show me something. I have to go back." I tightened my grip on his arms. "Listen to yourself. This isn't you talking." Jeff tried to pull away, but I held on. He was stronger than me, but I had leverage. For a moment, I thought I might be getting through to him. Then he looked past me at the water, and his whole body went rigid. "I can see the lights," he whispered. "They're so beautiful." I glanced back at the water. It looked normal to me, just dark ocean reflecting the late afternoon sky. But Jeff was staring at it like he was watching fireworks. "There are no lights, Jeff. It's just water." He wasn't listening anymore. I could feel him gathering himself, getting ready to make another move. I shifted my weight, trying to block his path to the diving gear. "We're going home," I said. "Right now." That's when he broke free. He twisted hard to the left, and my hand slipped off his wet shirt. Before I could grab him again, he was running toward the edge of the boat. "Jeff, no!" I lunged after him, but he was already at the rail. He didn't even pause to look back. He just vaulted over the side and hit the water with a splash that sent spray across the deck. I rushed to the edge and looked down. Jeff was already swimming away from the boat, his strokes powerful and determined. He wasn't heading for shore. He was swimming straight down toward the rig. "Jeff!" I shouted, but he didn't surface or look back. I watched him disappear beneath the waves, and my stomach dropped. He was going down without any gear, no wetsuit, no air tank, no mask, just his clothes and whatever air he could hold in his lungs. I grabbed the nearest diving equipment and started pulling it on as fast as I could. My hands were shaking as I struggled with the wetsuit zipper. The air tank felt heavier than usual as I strapped it to my back. I didn't have time to do a proper safety check. Jeff was already down there, and every second counted. I pulled on my mask and regulator, then rolled backward off the boat into the water. The cold hit me even through the wetsuit, but I ignored it and started swimming down as fast as I could. The water was murky, just like before, but I could make out Jeff's shape below me. He was swimming with smooth, efficient strokes, like he knew exactly where he was going. I kicked harder, trying to catch up, but he was moving faster than should have been possible for someone holding their breath. As I descended, the familiar outline of the rig structure came into view. The massive support beams stretched down into the darkness, and somewhere below them, I knew the creature was waiting. Jeff was already at the 30-foot mark, still swimming downward with no sign of slowing. I checked my depth gauge, 25 feet, and dropping fast. My ears were starting to feel the pressure, but I kept going. That's when I saw the lights. They started as a faint, blue-green glow coming from beneath the rig, but they were getting brighter as Jeff swam toward them. The creature was rising to meet him, its massive dome-shaped body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to dance through the water. I could see its tendrils now, long and graceful, reaching upward like arms welcoming an old friend. They were moving with purpose, not drifting randomly like before. The creature knew Jeff was coming. I kicked harder, pushing myself to swim faster than I ever had before. My lungs were working overtime, and I could hear my own breathing loud and ragged through the regulator. Jeff was maybe 15 feet ahead of me, but the gap felt like miles. The creature's lights were getting brighter, and I could feel something else now, that same pull I'd experienced before. It was weaker than what I'd felt during our first dive, but it was there, tugging at the edges of my mind. I fought against it, focusing on reaching Jeff before he got too close. But Jeff wasn't fighting the pull at all. He was swimming straight toward the creature like it was exactly where he belonged. His movements were becoming more fluid, more graceful, as if the water itself was helping him along. I was at 40 feet now, deeper than I wanted to be without taking time to decompress properly on the way back up. But I couldn't worry about that now. Jeff was almost within reach of the creature's tendrils. The massive jellyfish-like thing was fully visible now, its translucent body at least 20 feet across. The patterns of light flowing beneath its skin were hypnotic, and I had to force myself to look away and focus on Jeff. He was slowing down, his arms and legs moving in a dreamy, almost floating motion. The creature's tendrils were reaching for him, and he was reaching back. I put everything I had into one final burst of speed, stretching my arms out to grab Jeff's legs. My fingers brushed against his ankle just as the first tendril wrapped around his waist. I watched in horror as the creature's tendrils wrapped around Jeff's waist and legs like thick, translucent ropes. The bioluminescent patterns pulsed brighter as it tightened its grip, and Jeff's body went limp in the water. He wasn't fighting anymore, just floating there as the thing pulled him deeper. I kicked hard, pushing myself down through the murky water. My lungs burned, but I had to reach him. The tendrils were thick as my arm and felt like wet rubber when I grabbed them. I pulled with everything I had, trying to pry them loose from Jeff's body. The creature didn't even seem to notice me at first. Its massive dome pulsed with those hypnotic lights, and more tendrils drifted around us like underwater snakes. I wrapped my arms around Jeff's chest and kicked upward, but the thing's grip was incredible. It was like trying to pull someone free from steel cables. Jeff's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the creature's lights. His regulator had fallen from his mouth, and bubbles streamed from his lips. I shoved my backup regulator toward his face, but he didn't respond. The creature's influence had him completely. I grabbed one of the tendrils with both hands and yanked as hard as I could. The thing finally seemed to notice me then. More tendrils started moving in my direction, reaching out like they wanted to grab me too. I had to let go and kick backward to avoid them. The creature began descending, pulling Jeff with it. I followed, swimming down as fast as I could, but my dive computer was beeping frantically. I'd been down too long already, and my air gauge showed I was running low. The depth was increasing, 60 feet, 70 feet, 80 feet. The water got darker as we went deeper. The creature's lights were the only thing I could see clearly now, and they were getting smaller as the distance between us grew. Jeff looked like a rag doll in its grip, his arms and legs floating limply as the tendrils carried him down into the black water beneath the rig. My air alarm started beeping. I checked the gauge, less than 500 psi left, not enough to stay down much longer, definitely not enough to go deeper. I kicked harder, trying to close the distance, but the creature was moving faster than I could swim. At 90 feet, I lost sight of them completely. The creature's lights faded to just a dim glow in the darkness below, and then even that disappeared. I floated there for a few seconds, staring down into the black water, hoping to see something. Anything that might tell me where they'd gone. My computer beeped again. 300 psi. I had to surface now or I'd be in serious trouble myself. I looked down one more time, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of the rig's support beams disappearing into the depths. I started swimming up, fighting every instinct that told me to keep searching. The ascent felt like it took forever. My air ran lower with each breath. 200 psi, then 100. I had to force myself to breathe slowly and steadily, even though panic was clawing at my chest. When I finally broke the surface, I gasped and pulled the regulator from my mouth. The boat was about 50 yards away, bobbing in the swells. I swam toward it as fast as I could, calling Jeff's name even though I knew he couldn't hear me. I hauled myself up the ladder and immediately started scanning the water around the boat. Maybe he'd gotten free. Maybe the creature had let him go, and he'd surfaced somewhere else. I grabbed binoculars from the equipment box and searched in every direction. Nothing. Just empty water stretching to the horizon. I tried the radio first, calling the Coast Guard on Channel 16. My voice shook as I gave them our position and reported a missing diver. They asked for details, and I found myself stumbling over the words. How could I explain what had really happened? That a giant jellyfish-like creature had dragged my partner into the depths? We were conducting a structural inspection of an abandoned oil rig, I told them. My partner went down without proper equipment and didn't surface. I searched but couldn't locate him. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The Coast Guard dispatcher said they'd send a rescue boat and asked me to stay in the area to guide them to the location. I spent the next 3 hours circling the rig, watching for any sign of Jeff. The Coast Guard arrived with a search and rescue team, and I had to tell the story again. This time to a lieutenant who took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about our safety procedures. Your partner went down without gear? He asked. He jumped in before I could stop him. He seemed disoriented, maybe nitrogen narcosis from our earlier dive. The lieutenant nodded like that made sense. Nitrogen narcosis could cause confusion and poor judgment. It was a reasonable explanation for why someone might do something as reckless as diving without equipment. They put divers in the water, but they only went down to about 60 feet, standard search depth for their equipment. I watched them work, knowing they'd never find anything. The creature had taken Jeff much deeper than that, down into the black water where their lights couldn't reach. After 6 hours, they called off the search. The lieutenant handed me a card with a case number and told me there'd be an investigation. I'd need to give a formal statement and answer more questions about what had happened. I nodded and thanked them, but inside I felt hollow. Jeff was gone, and I was the only one who knew what had really taken him. The only one who'd seen the creature's lights pulsing in the darkness as it dragged him down. The Coast Guard boat headed back to shore, and I was alone again with the rig. I started the engine and began the long trip back to the harbor, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder at the water behind me. Part of me expected to see those bioluminescent patterns rising from the depths, but the ocean stayed dark and empty. Back at the harbor, I tied off the boat and sat on the dock for a long time, staring at the water. I'd have to call Jeff's family, explain what had happened. I'd have to face the investigation and stick to my story about a diving accident. No one would believe the truth, and even if they did, what good would it do? Jeff was gone, and the creature was still down there, waiting in the darkness beneath the abandoned rig. The Coast Guard investigation took 3 weeks. I sat in their office downtown twice, answering the same questions about what happened that day. The investigator, a guy named Martinez, was thorough but not suspicious. He'd seen diving accidents before. "So Morrison jumped in without his gear," Martinez said, flipping through his notes. "You said he seemed disoriented?" "Yeah, like he wasn't thinking straight." I kept my answers simple. The truth would have sounded insane. "Nitrogen narcosis can affect judgment, even at shallow depths," Martinez nodded. "Some divers get overconfident." I agreed with whatever explanation he offered. Nitrogen narcosis, equipment failure, poor decision-making, anything that didn't involve a massive creature with glowing tendrils. The official report listed Jeff's death as an accidental drowning during a commercial diving operation. The rig inspection was noted as incomplete due to the incident. No mention of unusual marine life or strange sonar readings. The Coast Guard had sent divers down twice more after that first day, but they'd only gone to 60 feet. They found nothing. I didn't push them to look deeper. Martinez closed the file during our final meeting. "These things happen in your line of work," he said. "Ocean's unpredictable." I signed the final paperwork and walked out of the building, knowing I'd never tell anyone what really happened down there. The creature was still under that rig, waiting, but proving it existed would mean going back, and I couldn't do that. The nightmares started 2 weeks after Jeff died. I'd wake up seeing those bioluminescent patterns, feeling the pull toward deep water. Sometimes I'd dream I was swimming down toward the creature, and I'd wake up gasping like I'd been holding my breath. I tried going back to work once, a simple hull inspection in the harbor, only 20 feet down. The moment I hit the water, my hands started shaking. Every shadow looked like a tendril reaching for me. I surfaced after 5 minutes and told the client I was sick. That's when I knew I was done. I called my equipment supplier the next day. "I'm selling everything," I told him. "Taking a break?" he asked. "Permanent break." He didn't ask why. In this business, people quit suddenly all the time, usually after something bad happened. I sold my dive gear, my compressor, my underwater tools, everything except the sonar device from that last dive. I kept that in my garage, though I never turned it on again. Sometimes I'd look at it and remember those chaotic readings, the way it had detected something that shouldn't have existed. Finding land work wasn't hard. Construction companies always needed people who weren't afraid of heights or dangerous conditions. I got hired doing bridge maintenance, working on scaffolding 50 feet above rivers. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd traded the depths for heights, but at least I could see what was coming. My new coworkers didn't know about my diving background. I told them I'd done general construction before. They accepted that without question. The first few months were rough. Every time I drove past the harbor, I'd think about Jeff. About how I should have stopped him from getting on that boat. About how I should have grabbed him before he jumped. About how I should have swum faster when the creature took him down. But I also knew the truth. That thing had gotten into his head somehow, the same way it had started getting into mine. If I'd stayed down there longer, if I'd kept fighting those tendrils, it might have taken me too. I started avoiding the waterfront entirely, took different routes to work, shopped at stores inland. The ocean had always been my life, but now it felt like a threat. Every time I saw deep blue water, I wondered what else was down there. What other abandoned places might be hiding creatures like that one? 6 months after the incident, I got a call from a marine biology professor at the university. Someone had given him my name as an experienced commercial diver. "We're studying bioluminescent organisms in deep water," he explained, "looking for experienced divers to help with research." I hung up without saying goodbye. The professor called back twice. I didn't answer. A year passed. Then 2. The nightmares became less frequent, but they never stopped completely. I'd still wake up sometimes, feeling like something was calling to me from deep water. On those nights, I'd get up and check that all my windows were closed, like the ocean might somehow reach me 20 miles inland. I never looked up news about the rig, never checked if other diving teams had been sent to finish the inspection. I didn't want to know if anyone else had encountered that creature. Part of me hoped it would stay hidden forever. Part of me worried it wouldn't. The guilt never went away. Jeff had a sister in Portland who called me once, asking about his last day. I told her he'd been excited about the dive, that he'd seemed happy. I didn't mention the obsession, the way he'd stared at maps of the water, the hollow look in his eyes when he talked about going back. She thanked me for being his friend. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at nothing. 3 years after the incident, I was working on a bridge over the Columbia River when I saw a news report on my phone. A research vessel had discovered a new species of deep-sea jellyfish off the Oregon coast. The article included a photo. A translucent, dome-shaped creature with long tendrils. My hands started shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. The creature in the photo was smaller than what I'd seen under the rig, and it was in much deeper water. But the basic shape was similar. The article mentioned bioluminescence and unusual behavior patterns. I deleted the article without reading the rest. That night, I dreamed about Jeff swimming down toward glowing lights, and I woke up knowing I'd made the right choice. Some things were better left in the depths. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. The ocean kept its secrets, and I kept mine. I spent the next 20 years trying to forget what happened under that rig, but some memories don't fade no matter how hard you try to bury them. The nightmares came less frequently as time went on, but they never stopped completely. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, feeling like I was still underwater watching those tendrils wrap around Jeff's body. The construction work kept me busy during the day. Bridge maintenance, building repairs, anything that kept me on solid ground and away from the water. I got good at it too. Turned out I had a knack for working at heights. My coworkers never knew about my diving background. As far as they were concerned, I'd always been a construction guy who didn't like boats. I moved inland after the first year. Couldn't stand living near the coast anymore. Every time I heard waves or smelled salt air, my hands would start shaking. I found a small place about 60 miles from the ocean, in a town where the biggest body of water was a creek that ran behind the hardware store. It wasn't much, but it was far enough away that I could pretend the ocean didn't exist. The guilt never left me, though. I'd replay that night over and over, wondering what I could have done differently. Maybe if I'd tackled Jeff before he reached the edge of the boat. Maybe if I'd called for help sooner. Maybe if I'd never taken that damn job in the first place. But deep down, I knew the truth. Once that thing got its hooks into someone, there wasn't much anyone could do to stop it. I kept the sonar device in my garage for 15 years before I finally threw it away. Every time I walked past it, I'd remember those readings. The way the screen showed something massive and alive, where there should have been nothing but steel and water. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering if other divers had found similar creatures at other abandoned sites. But I never looked into it. didn't want to know. The marine biology professor called 3 more times over the years. I recognized the number and never picked up. He left voicemails talking about research opportunities and unusual sightings off the coast. I deleted them without listening to the whole message. Whatever he was studying, I didn't want any part of it. My retirement came early. By the time I turned 55, I had enough saved up to stop working altogether. The construction company threw me a small party, and my supervisor said I'd earned it after all those years of reliable service. They had no idea I was running from something that lived in the depths of the ocean. I tried dating a few times, but it never worked out. How do you explain to someone that you can't go to the beach because you're terrified of what might be lurking beneath the waves? How do you tell them that the sound of water lapping against a dock makes you break out in a cold sweat? Most women thought I was just being difficult when I suggested dinner at restaurants that weren't near the waterfront. The news reports about marine discoveries always found me somehow. A new species of deep-sea creature discovered off the California coast. Unexplained sonar readings near oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. Divers reporting strange encounters with bioluminescent organisms. I'd read the headlines and feel my chest tighten, wondering if other people had seen what I'd seen. But I never reached out to any of them. Never tried to compare stories or find answers. Some nights, when the wind was blowing hard and I could hear it howling around the house, I'd think about Jeff. Wonder if he was still down there somehow, or if the creature had just consumed him. I tried not to think about what that might have looked like. Tried not to imagine him struggling in those tendrils as they pulled him deeper into the darkness. The official story never changed. Accidental drowning during a commercial diving operation. Equipment failure and poor decision-making. The Coast Guard file was closed, and as far as anyone knew, that was the end of it. I never corrected anyone who brought it up. Never hinted that there might have been more to the story. The truth died with Jeff, and I intended to keep it that way. I stopped reading diving magazines after the first few years. Stopped watching documentaries about ocean exploration. Stopped doing anything that might remind me of what I used to do for a living. When people asked about my past, I told them I'd worked construction my whole life. It was easier than explaining why a former commercial diver was afraid of swimming pools. The creature was still out there, though. I knew it without having to check. Sometimes I'd see news reports about the old rig, how it was finally demolished 12 years after our dive, how the steel was sold for scrap, how the site was cleared for environmental reasons. But I knew they'd only taken down the parts above water. Whatever was attached to those support beams was probably still there, waiting in the depths for the next curious diver to come too close. I thought about warning people sometimes, writing an anonymous letter to the Coast Guard or calling in a tip about dangerous marine life in the area. But who would believe a story about a giant jellyfish that could control people's minds? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd start asking questions about what really happened to Jeff Morrison. The years blended together after a while. Quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Afternoon walks through town where the biggest excitement was watching the high school kids hang out at the pizza place. Evening television shows that didn't involve anything underwater. It wasn't much of a life, but it was safe. It was predictable. It was as far from that rig as I could get without leaving the country. I never married, never had kids, never built the kind of life that most people would consider complete. But I was alive, which was more than I could say for Jeff. And I'd kept the secret, which meant no other divers would go looking for that thing based on anything I told them. That had to count for something. On my 70th birthday, I sat on my back porch with a beer and thought about all the years that had passed since that dive. The nightmares had faded to maybe once or twice a year. The guilt was still there, but it had settled into something I could live with. I'd built a quiet life away from the water, away from the memories, away from the thing that had taken my partner
and nearly taken me. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky orange and red. Somewhere 60 miles away, the ocean was doing what it always did, keeping its secrets in the depths where the light never reached. And I was doing what I'd always done since that day, keeping my secrets too, buried so deep that sometimes I could almost pretend they'd never happened at all.